I think what I'll do is I'll introduce you, then I'll go and sit down.
Okay.
Because otherwise I shan't see, and I should be in the way.
Yeah. Please, remote. Yeah. Okay.
So back and forth.
Where do I point it at?
It doesn't matter. It's not. It's a white.
Okay.
It's coming apparently.
It's just left and right shift. Just change it. Yeah. Okay.
It's bang on.
It's a very splendid gavel, I must say.
When I was chairman of Weald District Council, my husband bought it for me. It sat in a drawer for a long time. Where's Chris?
Alan has gone.
Oh, Alan, sorry, you're Chris.
I'm Chris, he's Alan.
Alan.
He will. He's around somewhere.
So we'll wait for him to come.
He'll be probably just coming up to 7:30.
Yeah. Very quiet. The anticipation, the excitement. Charles, I'll come and sit over there while they're talking, and then I'll come back to do the questions. Yeah. Otherwise, I shan't see a thing. Another gentleman.
With the question time afterwards, how is that going to work? Charles was saying that he wasn't sure whether we were going to have written questions in advance or just do a live
We
Q&A.
decided to do a live Q&A.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, it was all getting so complex and complicated. It was just that one or two of the High Weald members were a bit, we can't do that, we mustn't do that, will we? Either side doesn't matter, because I'm going to move anyway while you're speaking.
Rose between two thorns.
Yeah. It's not on there. Right. I love doing that. Instant quiet. Ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome this evening, and how kind it is of the Bell to enable the High Weald unit to be able to inform us, because that's what we're here for tonight, is to inform us on how we might like to go and vote on June the 23rd. None of us are for, and none of us are against. We're all here to listen and learn. My name is Sylvia Tidy, and I farmed in the High Weald for the last 56 years. And we have a very small farm, 100 acres in Ticehurst Wood. So I know what it's like to live and work the land in the Weald. And I think that's probably what all of you are here today, is you love the area, you would like the area to remain. And I think that's one of the things that perhaps we need to try to find out a little bit more about whether staying in or coming out is going to help us keep our landscape, and the medieval landscape in particular that is the High Weald. So I'm hoping that that's what you've all come for, and that when it gets to questions and answers, I should bang my gavel if I get a lot of toing and froing. So without more ado, I am going to read this because it's actually quite technical stuff. On my left-hand side is Chris Horseman, and on my right-hand side is Alan Bullion. And Chris is the editorial director of Informa Agribusiness. Now, I have to say I hadn't heard of them, but some of you may have done. And after graduating from the University of Birmingham, that's UK, Chris worked for a period of time at the European Commission before joining Informa. He's been monitoring European agricultural issues as a journalist and editor since joining Agri-Europe as Brussels correspondent in 1987. He took up a senior editorial position in Agri's UK office in 1991 and became editorial director in 2006. His specialist areas include the Common Agricultural Policy, the CAP, agricultural trade policy, and the World Trade Organization, and rural development policy. Chris is a regular speaker and moderator at agricultural conferences and seminars, and has made numerous appearances on TV, star in our midst, and radio news programs. On my right, we have Alan Bullion. Alan was appointed Informa's Agri's Chief Business Analyst in March 2010. You can see why I'm reading this, don't you? Alan has worked as a publisher, analyst, journalist, and editor for Informa Agri for over 17 years, having previously worked on specialist titles focusing on agriculture and food in Asia, and on organics, ethanol, and biodiesel, particularly in Brazil. Alan was awarded a PhD by the University of Southampton for a thesis on Sri Lanka. So what I think I can say from the introductions that I've given you, they are totally independent and give independent advice to many other authorities, governments being one of them. So I'm now going to hand over to both of them, and I hope we will all come away and know exactly what we're going to do on June the 23rd. But I'm going to sit over there until we get to questions and answers. The floor is yours, gentlemen.
Well, thank you very much, Sylvia, for that kind introduction. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. It's great to see you this evening, and it's clearly testament to the quality of the beer in this establishment, to which I can vouch myself, and also to the importance of the decision that we're all going to be called upon to make on June the 23rd. Sylvia has basically told us who we are. And this thing here works, which is always a good thing. Basically, what we are intending to do is cover some of the main issues which are at stake for agriculture and the rural environment in the Brexit discussion. If I can steal a rather good quote from Professor Alan Buckwell, who is an eminent agricultural economist and somebody who's studied Brexit in detail, he said that Brexit is essentially a divorce. And like all divorces, it's ultimately all about money and access. And those are the two things that we'll primarily be looking at today. Support to agriculture in the UK within the Common Agricultural Policy and what that might look like Britain was no longer part of the EU. And also the UK's trade relationships with the EU and the rest of the world, if it was no longer part of the EU, what would that mean for the agri-food industry in particular? And we'll be, and I'll hand over to Alan. We're sort of doing a double act here. I'm going to be handing it over to Alan, looking at some of the trade aspects, some of the agri-politics of Brexit, and perhaps drawing a few conclusions together at the end. You will quite rightly want to know who we are and where we are coming from, metaphorically and perhaps also literally. We're both actually residents of Tunbridge Wells, so our interest in the agriculture of the Weald is far from just an academic one. As Sylvia said, I would just like to emphasise the point. We are part of Informa. Informa is a FTSE 100 company providing business information of various types to subscribers right around the world, public and private sector. As such, neither Informa nor Agri Europe is associated or linked in any way to government or to the European Union, or has any formal connections with either the Remain or the Leave campaign. So I'd like to reassure you that any views that we state, you can at least be certain that nobody is paying us to hold those views. So, to misquote Monty Python, what is the CAP and what's it ever done for us here in the Weald? Well, it's done a lot of things, some good, some bad. And I wanted to draw up a sort of ledger to start with. The CAP has and continues to provide a sort of long-term funding framework for agriculture. The CAP, Common Agricultural Policy, apologies in advance for the jargon, works on a 7-year funded basis. And we're currently in the middle of a funding period running from 2014 to 2020. Within that period, every member country knows how much money it's going to get within the agricultural policy that's in force, and to a large extent, every farmer knows pretty much from one year to the next, within a few percent, what they are going to receive. So whether it's enough is a good question. Whether it's too much is another good question. But at least there is some stability of the financing that's available. We know, because we are part of the CAP, that farmers, our competitors in France, Germany, Belgium, Holland, etc., are not getting hugely more subsidy than we are, because although policy is implemented in slightly different ways in different countries, it's all part of the same system, and it's funded under the same sort of umbrella of the CAP, and consequently, we know that there isn't going to be a kind of arms race of subsidy that any particular member state can launch to the detriment of the interests of the UK. We have full access to the European single market of over 500 million people, all of whom eat food, I can exclusively reveal. So it's a very useful market for the agri-food industry to have access to. There is a clear framework for the rural development policy, and for agri-environmental policy. May not always be a particularly good or suitable policy, but at least it is clear, it is laid down, and we know what framework we're operating in on a 7-year basis. And of course, we have access to the EU's famous system for recognising local geographical specialities. Terms like Kentish ale, Whitstable oysters, these are two specialities from not that far from here, which are protected under European law as geographical indications. What that means is that if a brewery in Romania wanted to start producing something and call it Kentish ale, it could not do so. It would actually be illegal. The CAP has cost us a lot of money. It is an expensive policy, and the UK doesn't do desperately well out of it, certainly not compared to France and Poland and some other member countries. And I'll propose very briefly that in just a moment. It compels us, because we're all part of a single system, to adopt agricultural policies which, in some cases, wouldn't be the policies that we'd necessarily choose ourselves. There's a lot of the implementation of the CAP has, to a large extent, been devolved locally to a much greater extent than used to be the case. So we are able to adapt, pick and mix to some extent, but nevertheless, it remains the case that the CAP is not always as we in the UK, as we in the Weald would like it to be. The subsidies that are paid, that certainly the direct payments, which I'll talk about in a moment, have undoubtedly contributed to inflated land prices, which is a problem if you're a young farmer trying to acquire land and get started in the industry. And the CAP has created a lot of bureaucracy. I don't subscribe to the view that if we hadn't been part of the EU, then we would be completely devoid of bureaucracy, because the United Kingdom government is also quite keen on regulating agriculture for the benefit of consumers and the environment. But nevertheless, the EU has its own way of doing things, and some of the bureaucracy which farmers and food manufacturers have to deal with is probably a bit excessive. And it's slowed down agricultural adjustment within agriculture, and I've deliberately put that as something straddling sort of the plus side and the minus side, because the existence of the CAP and the subsidisation that the CAP has offered has meant that that the structure of farming in Britain and in Europe has not changed as quickly as it would otherwise have done. There hasn't been the consolidation, there hasn't been the innovation that would otherwise have been the case. Now, that's a bad thing in the sense that European agriculture is less competitive internationally than it might otherwise be. It's a good thing in the sense that we have been able to retain more of the small farm traditional landscape than would have been the case if we'd had a completely free market in agriculture, and that it was just we've been competing in the same way that, if I dare mention the analogy the steel industry has, where everything just gets concentrated in the place where things can be produced most cost effectively. And sadly, that doesn't seem to be South Wales anymore. So the CAP, good and bad, that's my sort of initial market balance, if you like, of how it looks. I mentioned that the CAP consists of a lot of money. This is the amount of money which goes to all of the different member countries of the EU. I've used two-letter acronyms for each country. Apologies for that. It's the only way to get it on the slide without the screen being about this wide. But you can see that the UK, as a fairly large member country of the EU, is one of the larger recipients of CAP money. At just under 4 billion euros, that's about 3.1 billion pounds, and these are figures for 2014. But other countries, Poland, Italy, Germany, Spain, and France, all get more money than we do. In some cases, particularly in the case of France, significantly more, and there's various historical reasons why that's the case. The CAP, and again, here's another jargon warning. The CAP is often described as being divided into two pillars, Pillar 1 and Pillar 2. Now, just to explain, Pillar 1 is that part of the CAP which deals with income and market support. So the direct aid payments which go to farmers, what used to be called the single farm payment, that all comes out of Pillar 1. Pillar 2 is more the rural development, agri-environmental accompanying measures part of the policy. And you can see that the UK gets its share of both Pillar 1 and Pillar 2. It gets a smaller share of the total of Pillar 2 than it does of Pillar 1. And this has been a sore point with British ministers of agriculture and over many years, and there doesn't seem to be much that we've been able to do about it. The UK contributes, I think, something like 10 or 12% of agricultural gross domestic product within the EU. So its share of CAP funding is less than its share of what it produces which is a statistical fact, and you can make of it what you will. The EU, as I mentioned, the UK received a total of 3.88 billion euros of funding from both Pillar 1 and Pillar 2 in 2014. In that year, it contributed a significantly more than that to the cap. Now, member countries don't contribute directly to a particular policy; they just pay into the EU budget, and then the EU budget is divided up and paid out based on where it's needed, essentially. But if you subdivide the UK contribution and make that proportionate to the amount of money of the total EU budget which is spent on the cap, then you would come up with this kind of figure. So the UK is a net contributor to the cap to the tune of about £1.5 billion euros, or £1.25 roughly billion pounds. What that means is that if the UK was no longer part of the EU, it could fund agriculture at the same level as it currently does, and spend £1.25 billion less doing it, because it would no longer have to make that contribution to agriculture in other poorer parts of the EU. Again, that has positive and negative connotations. So the big question is, if we came out of the EU, would the British government continue to support British agriculture? And if it did, would it continue to do so at the same rate and at the same level than is currently the case under the cap? I've put up here three quotes. Two of them are from the UK government. They both date from 2013 from different documents. And they both claim that certainly Pillar 1 funding, these direct aid payments to farmers, are not a desperately good idea, and they don't represent good taxpayer value for money, and that if the UK had its way, they would significantly reduce them or even phase them out completely. The third quote is from George Eustace, who is the current farming minister. He's also a campaigner on the Leave side. And he said at the NFU conference a couple of months ago that the UK would have enough money to fund its own agricultural policy. Could we do it? Yes, of course we would. Would we do it? Without a shadow of a doubt. So the question here is whether how much credence you give to the ideological statements which the British government has been making for many years about the fact that the cap is overfunded and that we should spend less money on it. I think the key question is, would DEFRA and British agriculture ministers, both Labour and Conservative, going back 20-30 years, have been saying roughly consistent things? Of course, would they have been saying that if Brexit had been in prospect then? And would they have said it if they thought they had a cat in hell's chance of any of their proposals actually being agreed by the other EU countries? I think it's undoubtedly the case that the UK government has taken a rather maximalist view on the cap over the years, knowing that they're not going to get their way, but they at least want to sort of counterbalance the claims of other countries who want to preserve as much of the old cap as possible. So I think you need to filter these kinds of statements through that prism. But it is undoubtedly true that UK governments, both left and right, over probably the last 2 or 3 decades, have consistently argued for a more liberal agricultural policy with reduced funding. And whether they meant so what we don't know is the extent to which that claim was influenced by the fact that the UK contributes more to the cap than it actually gets back. That's an open question. Direct payments, what used to be called the single farm payment, or direct payment scheme, is incredibly important for British agriculture, and especially now at a time when, as you're probably aware, a lot of farms are facing really serious problems due to persistently low market prices for cereals and milk and pig meat in particular. This is an assessment on average over the last 3 years of the amount of farm business income. These figures are for England, which was contributed by the direct payment from the EU. And you can see that for some types of farm, particularly the lowland grazing category is interesting because this would include beef and sheep farmers in Weald. Basically, the entirety of farmers' actual net profit was derived from the direct payment, or in the absence of a direct payment, they would have made a business loss. For cereal farms, on average, 72% of that net net profit, the farm business income, was contributed by the direct aid payment, and so on and so on. And you can see the categories here. Basically, it's the livestock sector that is most heavily dependent on this subsidy. And these figures, it's about time I did a commercial, isn't it, Alan? These figures are taken from the Preparing for Brexit report, which Agri-Europe produced towards the end of last year, and a revised version of which is on sale now at all good websites, should you wish to make a purchase. This chart is also taken from the same report. And it makes a guess, really, and it's no more than a guess, but I'd like to think an educated guess as to what a likely scenario might be. Supposing that at some point in the future, direct payments were reduced by 50% compared with what they are at present. As some kind of compensation for that, the agri-environmental payments under Pillar 2 were increased by 10% on average. Or if you were in a less favoured area, if you were in the Lake District or the mountains of Wales or wherever, you would get a 30% increase. So that's the scenario that we've projected. And in fact, with it's not a million miles away from what George Eustace was suggesting with his suggestion that the UK could contribute £2 billion a year to agricultural support, which is roughly 2/3 of what Britain is getting at the moment. So it's not an unfeasible scenario. If that was to happen, and all other income streams from diversified activities were to be the same, and if all costs were to remain the same, and that's in the real world, I have to admit, unlikely because farmers would adapt. But if they did remain unchanged, then the net impact of Brexit on farmers' net incomes would be a decline of between 16.7% and 48.4%. And again, it would affect different categories of farm differently. And I think that this is a not unfeasible scenario. I think this may well be the case. I think farmers would adapt and adjust. They would reduce their cost structure, and that would certainly offset some of the negative impacts of this. But nevertheless, I think this is not a million miles away from what we might realistically expect, given what we know about the UK government's attitude to agricultural subsidisation. So, if we were to leave the EU, there is a risk that subsidies would be reduced. There's a risk of a distortion of competition, because we would know that farmers in the continent would be getting subsidised at a higher rate than the UK farmers were, and that would give those farmers an advantage on the market if they were to be selling into our market and we were trying to sell into their market, which we would assume would continue to be the case. There would be a question which is not specifically linked to us in the southeast, but if you had a reduced funding allocation, how on earth would England, Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland agree to divide that up? That would be great fun, and might feed into possible discussions about whether Scotland still wanted to be part of the UK. If there was not a completely open single market, then there would be barriers to trade of the non-tariff variety. This is, if you could set up a situation where there were no import duties on trade between the UK and the rest of the EU, but there would still be barriers to trade if, for example, these technical issues like pesticide residue levels or which GM crops we authorised and which GM crops we didn't authorise were not harmonised. And the whole point of the UK having sovereignty would be that the UK would be, in principle, able to make its own decisions about things. The moment the UK starts making its own decisions about these things, it no longer has a completely harmonised market with the rest of the EU. There is the possibility, and this is a point that's being argued about, that the multinationals which in our food industry would disinvest and go and relocate somewhere else if it was disadvantageous to them to be located in the UK, which would then no longer be part of the European single market. On the plus side, UK agriculture policy could be better tailored to UK objectives. This problem of us having to comply with a policy that is sort of lowest common denominator for 28 countries, we could and should be able to do something about that. The net taxpayer cost of supporting agriculture would be reduced. Good news if you're a taxpayer, not fantastic news if you're a farmer, but nevertheless, farmers also pay taxes, so maybe it balances out. There would be more freedom for the UK to do what it instinctively wants to do and support biotechnology and innovations in agricultural science. But that would be if the public wanted to go along with it, and if, as I just mentioned, it doesn't hamper the UK's access to the EU market for its food exports. So that, oops, what's going on here? So that's again a sort of a balance sheet of what we might expect if the UK left the EU. I'm just going to say a couple more things before I hand over to Alan. This is the share of UK agri-food imports and agri-food exports, which come from the EU and from elsewhere. So 61% of our food exports go to the EU, roughly, and 71% of our food imports come from the EU. Now, people look at this sometimes and say, well, there you are. That it's clear that the EU will want to do a trade deal with us because they need us more than we need them. That is an erroneous conclusion to draw, and this actually shows you the share of each individual country's agri-food exports which go to the UK. And you can see that with the exception of Ireland and bizarrely Cyprus, and don't know why that's bizarre, but certainly Ireland would be would face big problems if the UK left the EU, and not just for its food trade in all sorts of areas. But apart from those two countries, every other member state sends 10% or less of its agri-food exports by value to the UK. So if there was to be a breakdown in trade because there wasn't a trade deal in place, then these countries would say, oh, right, well, that's 10% or 5% of our exports that we'll have to find the market for elsewhere. That's a bit of a nuisance. Whereas the UK would have to say, right, that's 60% of our exports that we'll have to find the market for somewhere else. So the difference, I would suggest, is a significant one. And of course, there has been a lot of discussion about which trade model the UK should adopt in the event of Brexit. And at this point, I'm going to hand over to my colleague Alan, who's going to say a little bit about that subject.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, Chris. So, does that lead on now?
Push it to the right.
Go to the right.
Try the left then.
I think we're going back in time now.
I'm pressing the button.
I think I must have, sorry, I must have wrecked it for you.
Oh, no, it's all right.
Try that.
Okay.
Give me a, give me a,
Right, so one of the problems about the trade scenario is that we don't actually know what the future is. If we all knew what the future was, we could be certain. But one of the criticisms is really that there are various models or different examples currently in operation that might relate to the UK if we left, but we don't actually know which one of these would operate, and there are certain advantages and disadvantages from them all. So, would we remain a member of the European Economic Area, for example, like Norway? Norway currently is a member of the EEA, as it's called. It still has to abide by the Common Agricultural Policy by and large, and pays in about 75% of the normal budget for agriculture into to be part of the EEA. So Norway often says, well, the problem is we are there, but we're not there. We're at the table, but we're not part of the discussions. One of the problems from the Norwegian point of view would be that if we left, we wouldn't be part, for example, of the future cap reform discussions. So by and large, you might still have to abide by common agricultural policy regulations and so forth, pay the equivalent of 75% of the budget we're already paying in, but not have any say. It's sometimes called fax democracy in Oslo, whereby faxes go back and forth telling the critics of this in Oslo what to do, but they have very little input in the discussion. So part of this is about not having a seat at the discussion table. Also, because I have a negotiated bilateral agreement, such as for Switzerland, Turkey, or Canada. Now, all these again have different advantages or disadvantages. Canadian deal, which is called CETA, has taken 7 years currently to negotiate. It's founders on all sorts of areas like cheese and beef, and no doubt if the UK did a similar deal with Canada or whoever, there would be similar issues about designated nations and whatever. I think the point to make is that agriculture, since it's been part of the World Trade Organization agreement since 1994, has been actually one of the big sticking points. It's been very, 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 very complex. And you may know, some of you in the room, that we've had this big impasse on the Doha round. The Doha development round in the liberalised trade agreements and to help the developing world was launched in 2001, 15 years ago, and is still ongoing. And a lot of the reason there was this discussion around what we call bilateral deals between one country and another, which is what the UK would have to do, UK with the EU or UK with Canada, whatever, is part and parcel of this. And we also have what we call plurilateral deals, involving a multiplicity of countries, as well as multilateral deals such as the WTO. So one of the things is it's complex. Agriculture is a big sticking point, often one of the biggest sticking points, and it takes a long time. Next one, please. So under any alternative model, UK farmers and food producers would face new barriers to trade and complex negotiations for these deals. So when we went down the Norwegian route, the Canadian route, the Turkish route, the Swiss route, or WTO, World Trade Organization, somehow we're going to have to renegotiate a lot of these deals. And in the absence of a specific agreement on agricultural products, the default would be WTO rules, and the EU applying its most favoured nation tariffs to UK agribusiness exports. Now, the problem is with this, it would take a long time. Of course, some people say, well, it would free up the UK to talk more easily to India or to Thailand or Japan or whoever, these trade deals with the EU that take many years, but there's no guarantee that this would happen any more quickly, I would suggest. Okay, next one. So under the Norwegian model, which is the EEA, agriculture is not included, so the most favoured nation tariffs would apply. Under Canada-style agreement, which has been favoured by Boris Johnson, while agricultural tariffs are eliminated in most cases, but trade in beef, pork, poultry, fruit and veg remains protected. So there's various different opt-outs according to which scenario. And the US has said it favours dealing with the UK inside of the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership. I'll just say a bit of a word about that because when Barack Obama was over here the other week, there was a lot of criticism about Barack Obama, the outgoing US president, saying, well, the UK should stay in the EU and it would be good for us all, and it would take 10 years, a decade or more, to agree a trade deal between the UK and the EU if we were out. I mean, it's true that some people I speak to say, well, we would have the freedom to do what we like. We could then discuss a UK-US trade deal without involving the rest of the EU. A couple of conclusions I have is that the same issues would be there, they wouldn't go away. And these are simply these of equivalence, that there are considerable differences between US agriculture and UK agriculture on genetically modified crops, on the use of chlorinated chicken, on beef hormones, and there would be the issue of geographical indications as well. These may be, again, rather contested, complex and drawn out issues. So it may take 10 years, it may be quicker, who knows. The other fly in the ointment is something I've been working on today, which is the pronouncements of the successors to Obama, who are much more protectionist, at least in their pronouncements. And you've got, on the Republican side, you've got Donald Trump, who is against trade with lots of countries, it seems, with China, with Mexico, and others. And Hillary Clinton, interestingly, isn't a lot different in her public pronouncements, because she's been trying to tack to the left and get the Bernie Sanders supporters on the side. And I would suggest that whether it's the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership with the EU or bilateral deals with the UK or whatever, it's going to be a tough fight. At the moment where I'm standing, it's going to be a tough fight to agree trade deals going forward of that type, which are complex and involving agricultural differences in the next 5 years of the US presidency. Things are becoming more protectionist, and the barriers are interestingly going up rather than coming down. And also on this side of the Atlantic, we've got similar opposition to these deals as well, as some of you will know in the room, on TTIP and others. So next one. So another scenario which I've been looking at is the free trade area encompassing the the UK, the Balkans, and Ukraine, which came from Michael Gove, which is an interesting one because Ukraine, which is somewhere I've worked on quite a lot, has what we call a deep and comprehensive free trade agreement with the EU, but it's still quite a small agreement between the EU and Ukraine on agricultural trade. And if we were to I suggest that the UK will be going backwards rather than forwards. It's under this sort of scenario that when you look at these sort of deals, they will be very, very difficult. And one of the other flies in the ointment is the Netherlands recently had a popular referendum and voted to reject the EU-Ukraine deal. And I've suggested that something similar could happen in another European country to such a UK EU or US trade deal. So it's not really, in some ways it appeals to the free trade element, but it's not really a very satisfactory model once you go into the details. Okay, next. So I think my conclusions, probably our conclusions anyway, were minor, that a post-Brexit government would have to manage domestic expectations that farm support payments would remain at existing levels. I mean, Owen Johnson and other ministers, past farm ministers, have said categorically that he would like to see the existing level of farm payments being maintained. But one of the problems is people also say, well, that would have to compete against education, against health, against a lot of other claims on that same pot of money, out with the debate over where that 3 billion or whatever pounds will actually go, whether it will go to upland farmers or different types of farmers across the country. It's also assumed that current farm trade relations could either be replicated or improved. Now, they may or may not be, but one of the issues is that the UK would still have to meet EU standards on labelling, on food standards, on lots of other issues to export, and that won't go away. You know, the idea, as Chris has said, that red tape and bureaucracy, much that people would wish it would go away, it wouldn't. And quite a lot of food safety regulations are there for everyone's good, you know, so that people know what they're reading on the label and know what they're eating. So neither of these outcomes about the same level of funding or farm trade relations being maintained should be taken as given, because we've also got the context of wider domestic EU and international obstacles. And given that currently protectionism seems to be the mantra in trade negotiations, that's going to be a problem. And also looking at the current figures from the National Farmers Union and Anderson's two reports I was looking at yesterday about the depression in the UK farming industry, and people having problems about borrowing money, about cash flow issues, about the problem of Weald prices. You know, the prices of most agricultural commodities, whether it's wheat or sugar or milk, are generally depressed because we've got oversupply, and this isn't going to go away in the short term. So the element of uncertainty, I would suggest, is one that will be uppermost on farmers and the rural communities' minds going forward. You know, whether this leap into the unknown, which Brexit may pose, will be a good or bad thing for them going forward. So thank you.
Thank you both very much indeed. Not sure whether I'm any clearer as to how I would want to vote, but you certainly have given a much clearer picture to me, who's been farming for 56 years, of exactly what the cap is doing for us and what we're paying in and what we're getting out. But I think for this area, it's much more to do with the landscape and smaller farms, maintaining that landscape that can be nurtured and grazed, because if it's not looked after, it will disappear. And for me, I would not want to leave that to the next generation. I would want to make sure that I was passing on the landscape that we have now, which has been passed down through generations, that I was passing that on to other people. So it's not so much a question of the food that we produce, it's actually keeping the landscape as it is and for other people and other generations to enjoy. Anyway, I'm going to ask you, has anyone got a question they would like? Lady at the back, and then the lady at the front.
My thanks to the two members as well for a very clear briefing. You're, of course, editorial, so very aware that there's another developmental policy pressure on the Weald, particularly, which is development. The other sort of gravitational pull on farmland is the non-farming use that sucks away so much of our productive land because the prices are now so extraordinary. I was a briefing the other day related to water policy in Sussex, and there was a representative of Natural England there who had seen a paper that I'd asked her to send to me. I haven't seen it yet. You may have seen it. They got a legal opinion on what the status of EU mandated protection of things like the Ashdown Forest and other areas of outstanding natural beauty, triple SIs, would be if we left the European Union. And the legal opinion was that unless the British government had actually made it British law, and she cited, for example, the radius, the 2 radii protecting areas around the Ashdown Forest, the 400-metre protection zone, which we have taken into our own national statutes, would remain. But the 7-kilometre radius that some people around here love and other people around here hate would disappear. That protection would be extinguished if we left. And I just wondered if you two have looked into this and would be able to give us a quick summary of what developmental pressures would be rendered more potent by a decision to leave.
Who would like to take that?
Yes, so for what I've seen, that interpretation is correct. The understanding about the 7 kilometres is correct. I think the other point I would make is that currently land prices are declining, interestingly enough, from the current surveys. And one of the impacts has been the uncertainty around Brexit on land prices. So there's been some interesting reports from various land agents looking at the impact of Brexit on land prices, and actually it does seem to be having a depressive effect on uncertainty. But I think you're right, there are various current protections, if you like, on zoning and so forth that may well be under threat, and the 7 kilometres is an interpretation I personally heard. Yeah.
I would defer to Alan. I'm not an expert on planning law, but I think it does, as a sort of more general point, it emphasises something which would be a very significant challenge if the UK came out of the EU, which would be that there would be, almost everywhere you look, there would be a challenge to unpick the legislation in force from the EU legislation that was around it. So what laws would we have to re-adopt as UK law because it was no longer valid as EU law? Some we could get rid of. We'd be quite pleased to get rid of it. Others we'd be quite anxious to reinstate. There would be a lot going on, and I must admit, I think if I was a lawyer, I might even vote in favour of Brexit because there's a lot of work coming the way of people whose job it would be to unpick all of this.
Thank you.
Sorry, they sometimes call it gold plating, don't they? But I mean, there's a lot of good reason for gold plating quite often, in terms of legislation. And in fact, I did see a comment about the lawyers, but they reckon they would be kind of work after about 5 years or so, but that would be a good 5 years of work for.
Lady in the front here had a question.
Yeah, I'd also like to thank you for giving such a sort of clear and balanced explanation. But I just wanted to ask a very general point, and that is looking at the figures. The CAP appears to account for something like 40% of the EU budget. The EU budget is huge, so that's an enormous amount. And that over time, and as these funds are sort of allocated, I don't know who makes the decisions or how they're made, but it must inevitably distort the markets, distort prices, production, land values, both within the EU countries and relative to the rest of the world. So, looking at the larger picture, I'm not sure that having CAP in place in the long term is such a good idea.
I'll just make one comment about that. So it's about 40%. It's about 40% at the moment. There's a midterm review of looking at reform currently going on, which again the UK would be part of, and that figure, the total figure, is declining relatively. I think one of the other points, and Chris will elaborate on this, that there's been an increasing shift from what we call Pillar 1 payments based on productivity to Pillar 2 payments for environmental gains and all the rest of it. And the idea has been to get away from rewarding production. But I think Chris will probably tell you a lot of the bad things about the cap, as well as some of the good things. I mean, obviously it does distort any subsidy support system, inevitably distorts. But also, you know, why is CAP there? It's a food security system. You know, if we look back to perhaps we didn't speak about this, you know, if we look back to the beginning of the EU, you know, agriculture was very, very important because of the Second World War and the food security situation as it was in this country. It has been considered to be, even though it's a minority employer in this country, about 500,000 or so farmers directly and about 1% or so GDP. It's still symbolically important, and all the other jobs and rural economy and food processing and restaurants and so on, it supports along the value chain. So that's the counter argument for those payments, I guess. Anyway.
I thought it kinder to spare you a history lesson on the evolution of European subsidies, but it is, Alan is right. The cap evolved. It had its genesis in the 1950s when everybody was very anxious to stimulate agricultural production because everyone could remember what happened during the Second World War and so on and so on. And the policy came together during the 60s and into the early 70s as basically a support and incentive scheme for farmers to produce. And if they couldn't find the market, then there was this safety net that they could sell into if the price happened to take a bit of a dip. The tragedy of the cap was that once the European farmers had met the target of self-sufficiency, generally speaking, and gone on to exceed it, there wasn't a significant scaling down of the level of subsidization at that point. And that was why you got into come the mid-1980s. You had these horrendous butter mountains and wine lakes and everything, which became a massive political embarrassment, and then in turn led to the, I am giving you the history lesson, sorry, which gave the reforms of the 1990s, which have basically led us to where we are at present with a sort of income support focused policy rather than a market support focused policy, which is why you don't get the huge kind of mountains of surplus stocks anymore, but you are still paying significant amount of money for farm subsidies. There are many economists who would absolutely agree with you that the sheer volume of money that's been pumped into agriculture over the decades has not helped us. It has had the effect of distorting markets. It's certainly inflated land prices. Back in the days when the EU was still subsidizing exports, and by the way, it is no longer subsidizing exports, but back in the days when it was unfairly competing with developing countries on third country markets. The question is, how do you get from where you are to where you might ideally like to be? And having not followed that reformist course from the sort of 70s and 80s, we are now at a position where we are here, and ideally we'd like to be there. And we can't possibly get there in one step because that would be so traumatic that you would wreck the farming industry in the process. So there is a process of reform which is underway. It is proceeding at quite a glacial pace, such that only people who've been around for decades and decades, like myself, old crumblies like me, can actually sort of detect that it's happening. But there is a process of reform ongoing. I think if the UK was to take control of its own farm policy, that adjustment process would probably speed up, and we would move closer to something which economists would recognise as being a rational program. But in the short term, that would be traumatic for a lot of farmers. So that's the trade-off, I think.
you not feel that we're there somewhat already? Sorry to interrupt, but you know, dairy farmers, 2 dairy farmers at least going out a week currently. You've already said cereal prices down. Land price, pork price, all those are suffering. Even just the thought of coming out of the EU is probably having an effect on that. As it stands at the moment. Do you not feel if we voted to come out that actually that would be quite catastrophic for British farmers? Because if we've got a minimum of 5 years to actually sort all the policies out, what's going to happen within that 5 years? Are those numbers going to double, if not triple?
The number of farmers in the UK and in Europe has been declining for at least 40 years. It will probably continue to do so because small businesses tend to amalgamate. Small businesses tend to become larger. That's sort of how economic forces tend to work, and that's happened despite the cap and despite the largesse that was thrown at the agriculture sector in the earlier days of the policy. I think that if there is a vote to leave, then it won't do the confidence of many small businesses much good. Certainly not farms. What happens in the long term would depend on how quickly a comprehensive UK agriculture policy was put together, and how generous it was in terms of replicating the kind of support that we currently have. And that is an unknown at present.
You've got 500 plus cow herds going out of business because they can't hold. So it's not just the small business.
I'm going to go to the gentleman here who had his hand up.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. Can I just ask you a little bit about, several times we mentioned the rise of land prices, and around about £10,000 an acre, we quite often hear, is partly due to the CAP. I think certainly in the southeast, the effect of London commuters, people who want to have hobby farms and everything else. So I really don't think that the single farm payment has really, you wouldn't get a return on investment if you bought £10,000 an acre and relied on your single farm payment. It far better to put it in the bank and probably lose money on the job. So I think we need to crush that one straight away. The other question I'd like to ask is one of your slides. You said if it was Brexit and it showed the decrease in farm incomes in various different. There was the mix, the dairies, pigs, poultry, and so on. You said that there may be an effect that there would be structural reforms, and one assumes that maybe larger enterprises, bigger farms, as a small one go, and the lowering of costs. Now, I'm not entirely sure. I wonder if you could expand on that. I'm not entirely sure how most farms can cut costs. And if it is a case of structural reform and bigger farms, one assumes that means actually shoving out a few more hedges and making bigger fields. And I don't think that's going to work in high Weald.
No, I'm not sure that I did mention lower costs. I think that if Brexit happens, then farmers will look to find ways of reducing costs, and that may be by amalgamating, by spending less money on pesticides, fertilizers, replacement animals, whatever it might be. They could. I don't think they'll be allowed to rip hedges out because we have laws in place that prevent them doing that, and that will continue to be the case, I'm sure, under a UK farm policy. And I think most of us in this room would say that was a good thing. Yes, it would be. Going back to your point about land prices, it is true that in this particular area, it's the residential area and the sort of the overflow from the residential market has a particular impact on land prices here, and it is. That is probably the determining factor, and in large parts of southern England that is the case. Nevertheless, if you buy land with the knowledge that attached to that is, a regular guaranteed flow of X thousand pounds a year of single farm payment, then it's likely that you'll pay more for that than would be the case if that flow of income was not there. So it's not a determining factor, but nevertheless, it's a factor which influences that.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, I'll just come back to a couple of points I made. Was we're still in the overarching area of the world commodity prices and the domestic prices, which gentlemen over there referred to, which obviously have won't go away whether we stay in or go out. and what people are prepared to pay. And secondly, I was looking at a couple of reports yesterday which about the British farming sector, which were very gloomy. You know, I thought, well, where's the good news? There was very little good news there, and maybe the authors had that particular message. But difficulties with bank lending, you know, there were quite simple things that could be sorted out whether we remain in the EU or not. You know, about bank lending to farmers and all the rest of it. Secondly, I was trying to look like you for where farmers could become more efficient, and the problem is that we're already down to, you know, low margins, and we've made those efficiencies. Where do you go next? And I had to laugh because in this report they had the old thing about diversification. So, you know, do you get a part-time job and work part-time on the land, which is what people actually did in the 19th century in this country. They work part-time on the land and part-time in something else. And I had to laugh because I was listening to the book at bedtime on Radio 4, which is an agricultural book at the moment, and this farmer was saying, bloody diversification, that's all they've been telling me what to do. I've been diversifying forever, you know. So that made me laugh. But also, you know, it suggested one of those online tools for efficiency, all this sort of stuff. I just felt it wasn't terribly satisfactory as a alternative solution. But nevertheless, you know, it is tough times, and I think people will have to adapt. I think the worry that the gentleman referred to over there is, you know, if we did leave, how far up the priority list would agriculture be? And I suspect it wouldn't be very high, because it's not very high at the moment. Indeed, when David Cameron announced his 5 tests, if you like, for EU reform, I noticed immediately that farming and rural policy and agriculture weren't even mentioned. And then you've got the issue that people come to me about, which hasn't been referred to on there, about farm labour from Eastern Europe and so on, working in horticulture, fruit and veg mainly. There's a whole lot of issues that I suspect haven't been properly aired in this sector, out with your particular point about land prices.
So can I come back to just one? Thank you very much. Diversification, excellent. We're part of a cereal cooperative, cereal storage. I look around the room, and when we have a meeting, and there's 6 of us. We're all the farmers' sons and sons of those who actually formed the cooperative. And every single person in that room is diversified. Yeah. We all have, you know, whether it's share farming, you know, I grow pursuits, the other people doing shoots and all sorts of things. So I don't think anyone can say we should go and diversify, because we already have. Yeah. And the other thing about it is the whole time we're looking at our margins. It is very difficult. If we can cut costs, we will. We buy through cooperatives, so our fertilisers, our crop protectants. I hate the P word, the pesticide word. We don't use pesticides, we use crop protectants. And I'll tell you what, if there's a way of making a bigger margin, I think we would have found it already. So I would just say that.
Yeah. Can I just ask, sorry, because I think for this part of the world in particular, if we can't rip hedges out, and none of us wants to rip hedges out because we've been busy putting hedges back in where we ripped them out, it's the agri-environment schemes, to me, and for this part of the world, that I think are very important. A lot of farmers have gone into countryside stewardship, then on to higher level agreements, and that is what is going to keep this part of the world basically looking as it looks. Because if we can't get money with grazing animals because it doesn't pay, it's got to be those environmental agri incentives that will keep this. So I think for me that's the scariest bit, is not knowing whether anybody higher up in government, no matter who or what, is interested in the landscape and how it performs and what you need to do with it if you're not grazing it.
Yes, I mean, I share your concern. I think that the agri-environment schemes, the pillar 2 bit of the equation, certainly in European debates over the past 10, 20 years, has been the soft target. If there's been a debate about, we've got to cut the budget, shall we cut people's direct aid payments, or shall we sort of have a bit of slice of the agri-environmental schemes? It's been the Pillar 2 budget which suffers. What would a UK government do if it had sole control over shaping our agri-environmental programme? And that is an unknowable question. A lot would depend on the overall level of financing to agriculture. It could be that, certainly in the past, DEFRA has tended to talk about spending much less money on Pillar 1, direct aid payments, and putting proportionally more money into Pillar 2, and doing the sorts of things that the general public want farmers to do, like look after the countryside and support wildlife and habitat and so on. So it's possible that we might see that reversal of the balance. At the moment it's sort of 75%, 25% between Pillar 1 and Pillar 2. Maybe that will be balanced out. But in the likelihood, and I think it is a likelihood, that the overall agricultural budget will be somewhat reduced, then how much money will there be left to go around? If the government puts more money into supporting upland agriculture and supports the Peak District and the Lake District, and the Bodmin Moor and places like that, then does that mean that relatively affluent areas like the Weald miss out? These are questions which I think are exercising me when I contemplate a future outside the EU.
Can I ask a follow-up question on that?
Yeah.
Which, on behalf of a friend of mine who isn't here tonight, which is his view is that support, if we took the Brexit option, that organic agriculture would be disastrous for organic farmers. Now, have you seen objectively? Is that how you feel it would pan out? Do you think organic farmers, particularly, who've really put themselves on the line, although for a while they had the funding to do so, would be particularly vulnerable to be left more than average?
I think that I don't think the British government is as sold out on the benefits of organic farming as some other European countries are. There are places like Italy and Austria, to take two examples, where the amount of funding for organic farming is very high, and they're absolutely committed to that, to producing this food that that consumers want over there. They're absolutely convinced of the environmental benefits of organic farming, and they support it very quite heavily. Britain has always seemed to me, and I'm just going by impressions of discussions that I've seen over 25 years, has thought that organic farming is a good thing, but it's not something that the UK has queued up to throw money at. There was in the sort of Tony Blair era, there was quite a lot of funding available, but then there was more money available overall, and that's attacked.
Right. Have you, sorry, finished?
Yes.
Yeah. Gentleman
I'll
there.
just say something about.
Right.
I'll just say a little bit about the organic thing from a UK perspective. Owen Paterson, when he was farming minister, was much more pro genetic modification, and as Chris alluded to in one of his slides, there's a strand in current Conservative government thinking that actually, the EU legislation on genetically modified crops is bad for trade and all the rest of it, and it may, Brexit would mean potentially a better scenario for some of these products. The Labour Party under Corbyn is interesting because Kerry McCarthy, as the agriculture spokesman for Labour, is much more pro vegan, vegetarian, and organic farming. Whether of course Labour would have, because predominantly problem for Labour. It's always had agro-system towns, and Bristol is where the current one comes from. Because they're not that well represented in the countryside. But one could say that there would be more of a organic type domestic policy from Labour. But I think that the problem is that the competition for the total pie would still be the same, and where that was divided up would be the key question. So I think in recent years, organic farming has increasingly tried to look for support from other sectors, from supermarket chains and other types of funding to sustain it, because it's always been seen to be a relatively small niche in the overall funding scenario. Yeah, if that helps.
The gentleman in the yes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And I'd like to thank the speakers for giving a very interesting talk. I personally am a strongly Brexit man, as most people would know. I feel that the CAP is a behemoth. It's very expensive, and as it was pointed out, don't get back as much as we pay in. It's for the little people in this area who farm corn, as I do. It does make a big difference getting a CAP subsidy. Otherwise, we would lose money. We are stupid enough in this high Weald area to try and grow corn. Okay, that's our fault, but we just keep going with the subsidy. But at the same time, people in the eastern counties who have these large farms are getting stinking rich on it, and that is not right. And what I feel is that we've got to come out, and then our country has a very good record for agriculture. We nearly became self-sufficient after the war, but now, of course, we've let that slip. But I feel that the government can't ignore the farmers. And if we came out, they have money. We're spending, what, £350 million a week. We've got money to treat the farmers in a very sensible way. And I think, although the ones in the high areas up in Wales and in Cornwall, they desperately need help, they could even out the payments in a much more fair system so that the big farmers don't get stinking rich and the small farmers will exist. It may well be that we have to get out of growing corn in this area. It's just one of those things. I think supply and demand. And I feel we don't want to rely on subsidies per se. I think if we could get back to world commodity market prices, it makes a very artificial marketing system if we have subsidies. But slowly but surely, I have a feeling that we should get back to world commodity prices. And if we can't produce at that price, fair enough, get out. Otherwise, stay in it as much as we can. We've got a very strong farming community in this country, and I feel that the government will look after us if we come out. So I'm afraid I'm a very strong Brexit man.
Thank you. Yeah.
I'll just say something about the subsidy situation.
Okay, the last question. That'd be the last.
To my knowledge, and Chris,
You can come back.
to my knowledge, and Chris may correct me, there's only one major agricultural producer in the world that subsists without subsidy, and that's New Zealand. A country of 3 million people. 4 million. 4 million. 4 million. Okay. 3 million plus sheep. Okay. 4 million people. But nevertheless, New Zealand is the only major example that I know of a country that went, and succeeded in getting rid of its subsidies. If you look at the US, if you look at most countries around the world, I mean, in Russia, where I go, and Ukraine, they're always saying, we would love the EU payments. We would love something like the Hungarians get in the common agricultural policy and so on. So that's the flip side. Wherever you go in the world, if you look, and given that agricultural prices are depressed at the moment, because supply exceeds demand. It may well take a long time to rectify the UK economy to where you think it should be in an imperfect world of economic balance under your scenario. That's not to say it might not work, but it might do a lot of damage in the meantime to many farmers, I would suggest. Okay.
Yeah, just on your point about farmers in East Anglia getting filthy rich on farm subsidies, I share your annoyance about that. Under the current cap regime, well, it's actually the English authorities were given the option under the cap to put a ceiling on the amount of subsidy that any one individual could receive at 150,000 euros per holding, and the government chose, under its own sovereign authority, not to impose that cap. So you know, that's sorry.
Which government?
DEFRA.
Right, but it was under which political?
It was the coalition government in 2012-2013.
Right, the gentleman at the back, and then I'm going to take that as the last question and wind up.
I do feel privileged. I'm really after some expert opinion here. I'm a Remainer, and the gentleman there spoke very eloquently about exiting Brexit. My background to this is until recently a quasi-diplomatic role in The Hague and Brussels, which gave me access to all sorts of opinions. And so I come at it from that point of view. We've talked about the local issues, and we've talked, and the debate is a bilateral debate, written in or out of that club. It's a two-way deal. There are a lot of countries and a lot of provinces within countries who are looking at what we are doing, and they look at us as a Trojan horse, because there's a lot of people that want to renegotiation. There's an increasing number of people in countries who want out of the EU. And I think we have to ignore this bilateral stance from it and say, if we did this, just imagine you're in a club and you're a respected and strong member of that club, and you walk out in a fit of high dudgeon. The weaker members go, this club's no good anymore, I'm off too. And suddenly we're not talking about a 2 or 5 year renegotiation. We're talking about a referenda going on all over the place. People wanting renegotiations. While we are trying to renegotiate our way back into this club under our exited terms. I mean, it just doesn't bear thinking about. You know, we have. It's unsatisfactory at the moment, but I'm absolutely certain that it will get a whole world more unsatisfactory if we leave. And the chances of us ever getting back to equilibrium where we are now, let alone an enhanced position, diminishingly small, certainly in my working lifetime, if not my living lifetime. So that's my counter-argument to the gentleman there who spoke so eloquently about Brexit. So we have the left and the right of the house. Well done.
Sorry. Yeah. Yes. I think I have considered just what you have said in this kind of nightmare scenario. And indeed, for people who support leaving, you know, because it's mainly the issue about sovereignty. They say, sovereignty over our own territory, over our own affairs. It's increasingly, of course, whether you agree or disagree with it, it's being cited in France, in the Netherlands, and in other countries, as you're fully aware. And furthermore, it's being cited as an opposition to all sorts of trade deals. The Netherlands, for example, recently, as I said, had a vote against the Ukraine EU deal. It wasn't a binding vote, but it came out against closer ties. There's nothing to stop further referenda of that sort in the Netherlands, or indeed in other countries. And the Netherlands is already talking about one on TTIP. There's nothing to stop the Netherlands going forward if the UK leaves the EU, having a referendum to stop us ever joining again, or having closer, more favourable trade terms. So, you know, personally, I'm a big believer in democracy, but of course, I think I've used the phrase that it can come back to bite you on the leg. You know, we could have this hyper democracy, if you like, where we're like Switzerland, where people are constantly voting on all sorts of arcane issues, and people may not vote on the issue that's in front of them. They may vote because they don't like the weather or the government or whatever. On that particular day, they get up and feel in a bad mood and want to kick the cat and kick the government. And I think that's the problem, that we've got this referendum now for better, for worse. We've got our body of evidence. People will make up their minds. The government of the day will presumably respect the sovereign wish of the British people, and we will live with consequences, whatever they are. I think we've presented scenarios under which that may or may not map out, but a lot of it is incredibly unknown, because in the event of an exit, we simply don't know which of the various putative models the UK government will adopt going forward, and how that will pan out in future negotiations, as you say, with other EU countries and the wider world.
Yes, I agree, Alan. I think that it really boils down to, I think this is my personal view, is that for the Remainers, it's all about the economy and the economic benefits of staying in. For the Leavers, it's all about getting sovereignty back and having control over particularly immigration and everything else for which we have to pool sovereignty at the moment. And you know, that's not a circle that can be square that's to be circled, whichever the expression is, very easily at all. So it's just a question of whether people want to have that absolute sovereignty over Britain's affairs, or whether they want to stay in a club which most experts seem to think will leave us better off.
Well, the same experts who wanted us to stay in the EU. I mean, no, sorry, to join the euro. No,
Join
the euro.
The euro. Well, not just them.
Well,
that's a separate conversation.
Yeah, and not for tonight.
The UK is not in the euro.
No, I just
Well, some people do.
want to thank you all for being such a kind audience. It was always a little bit of the unknown, and it was great that actually the Brexit and the Remain came right at the end of the day. So we were actually learning something and trying to make up our own minds about how we wanted to go forward. I have to say, not sure. But I do know that for me, the important thing is that I can understand that the landscape becomes an important part of any government, no matter which colour it is or which perspective, that it is that part of it that it understands and realises that unless you keep your landscape and your areas of outstanding natural beauty, will be lost forever. So for me, that's the really important bit. But I do want to thank you. I want to thank our speakers in particular, because huge insight, and it's been very interesting. I also want to thank the High Weald unit, because it was their idea in the beginning, and we have a committee, and the committee got a bit hot under the collar of, oh, you mustn't do that. So I said, well, that's fine. I'm a farmer. I'm happy. We'll go ahead. And the Bell, bless their cotton socks, took the heat off us altogether, because they said, we'll put the evening on, and that will be great. So a big thank you to them, and a big thank you to all of you who've made my job so easy this evening, and also our speakers' job so easy. And I'm sure the Bell would be delighted if you went and had another drink. It's kind of have somebody
Well, so that was great. I think your point I think is very valid. But what we don't want is a wonderful large sort of park zone for people to go and play. It's a vibrant rural economy as well. Yeah. But no, well done for putting it on. I've been to quite a lot of Brexit debates. I went up to the other few one day after, it was very good.
Well, I was going to say, Dan is no good going to
No, he speaks very well.
He speaks fantastically.
Yeah.
But you won't change his mind. It doesn't matter what you say.
I've heard him ever since 17 years ago, so I've seen many people have the Brussels run the European Parliament. You know, you're this against why have you had 17 years? Yeah, and just slag it off. You know, I thought in the early days he might be a reformer.
No. He just goes there, does his job, he comes back out and winds everybody else up.
Because I spoke to him the other day and I said, well, Dan, you've been an MEP for 17 years living in Brussels. Am I right in thinking you're not eligible to vote? Almost 15 years as an expat. He said, no, I'm still a UK citizen. And then I had actually bloody flaming around at the end. It's really good up there. In Norway. He said, oh, tariff-free Norway. I said, no, they pay tariffs and they fish at the EU. Yeah, and they do it. And that's the interest in agriculture. And I got to check I think the truth, which is this one that they're peddling in Norway, they're tariff-free, which is complete trouble. Yeah. No, and you wouldn't take it here. So I've been trying to find some evidence for it. I'll get these guys try Sweden in Europe. And it's very early days. I'm an agricultural economist, so yeah, I went to Reading and did agricultural economics in the 70s. You know, so,